Рот закройте, себя ведите достойно. Что вы орете все? Вы все военные, мужики. Все. Игрушки закончились. Вы все военные. 3 дня здесь. Борт. 2 недели до подготовки. Долго. С работы вас никто не уволит. У вас работа, все зарезервировано. Ваше рабочее место.
So if you're wondering how Vladimir Putin's new draft is going, not well, seemingly, when you have to shout down a group of people who really don't seem that they want to participate in this special military operation, that's probably not great. The second detail that makes it not so great is, bearing in mind that I do not speak Russian, people commenting on that video and it's posted online said that it is actually mistranslated in the subtitles, that the 2 weeks until training, which seems a little bit weird, why are they holding them for weeks before training, is actually a mistranslation, and it is 2 weeks of training, which probably not enough, particularly when you're entering into a war where clearly your side has not been nearly as prepared as we were led to believe that they would be. So people who don't want to go there, being forced to go there and given minimal training before going there, not a great idea. Now they did reassure them, your job will be waiting for you, which I guess technically might be true, but bear in mind, thousands and thousands, at least admitted by Russian soldiers, have died, let alone the external count, which puts it at the potentially tens of thousands. A lot of people will not be returning for their jobs, including likely some of the people in that room in the video that you just watched. And by the way, when I refer to it as a draft, some apologists for Putin might say, no, it's not a draft, it's a limited thing. Turns out that was a massive lie, and we're gonna get into the details about that. But Brett, what do you think?
Right, that dynamic that you're alluding to is just this selective choosing of people you believe that has no consistency in terms of your rubric for trusting someone. There's so many people who are like, I just want to be a contrarian. It seems like everybody's on the side of like, don't invade Ukraine. I'm gonna find some stupid reason why it's okay to do so. And just believe Putin, who is basically doing the same thing we did in Vietnam, which is like, I'm just gonna fight this war that wasn't really provoked in any tangible way. Now, obviously there's differences between the two, but that's the sentiment. And Russians understand this because they through tons and tons of lives in Afghanistan and failed. And the worst part is like a lot of these people, according to the original claims by the Russian government, are former military and have some kind of combat experience. Now that is a very tenuous, a very vague definition by all accounts. And so there's a lot of people brought up back up into this, but it just yields moments like that where like, you're all military now. You're all going to fight in Ukraine. I don't want to spend much time explaining that only like half the people really are kind of okay with this. And the rest are like, I will get in trouble if I say no. But it's just a ridiculous, like I dub the whole idea of a draft is I dub the soldier now. It's just so bad.
Yeah, and one of the reasons we have to talk about this is we have to keep track of where sort of the goalposts sort of have gone. This was initially, remember, supposed to be a conflict. It was gonna be awesome for Russia. It was gonna be over super soon. It was gonna reestablish them on the global stage. And no one in Russia would ever have to suffer really, and in particular, they'd never really know what was happening over there, not the actual facts. It would all be filtered. Well, it's moved pretty far so far throughout this year. Now more and more people are being forcibly taken away and forced to participate in this. And when you send 300,000 additional soldiers, maintaining the fiction that it's a special military operation and not the largest draft and the largest invasion that Russia has been involved in many decades is gonna be pretty difficult to do, particularly as more and more stories like this start to get out. So a 26-year-old PhD student and lecturer at a prominent Russian university told the BBC 2 men turned up at his house to draft him, despite the fact that he's a student and they are supposed to not be forced to participate in this. More importantly, maybe, he has no military experience. He is not one of these people that previously has served and is being called back up. So that has proven to not be true, both parts of that. A 63-year-old man was drafted as part of the mobilization. He has 2nd-degree diabetes and a brain condition known as cerebral ischemia. He was tested by doctors and deemed fit to serve. Maybe he's a badass 63-year-old, I don't know. Doesn't sound like he should be sent there. One Muscovite who was detained with her husband at the protests earlier this week said that male protesters were given draft papers at the police station. Quote, there was a military recruiting officer who gave them the detained men draft notifications. When the first person was asked to go to a separate room, we didn't understand what was going on. But when he returned with a draft slip, we just started crying. This group, OVD Info, it's a monitoring group that watches what happens with protests and protesters, say that this has happened at least 15 different police stations. And Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, who we talked about yesterday, his son was pranked by Russian YouTubers and on the phone said that he wasn't gonna go. He says that the practice of issuing draft orders inside police stations was not against the law. I guess the idea that you're just taking random protesters and now punishing them by forcing them to be sent to Ukraine where they very well might die, that seems like it should be against the law. Also, a 17-year-old boy was conscripted. He was at an anti-war protest. You're not supposed to be able to be conscripted unless you were 18. But they decided, well, he was at a protest, so screw him, he's going. And so many of these things that they said were true of this mobilization have been proven almost instantaneously to not be founded in fact whatsoever.
I love that. That's who you want to send, people who don't want to go there. That's a really good thing, especially when the main criticism of your entire fighting force, and part of this is probably cherry picked, but looking at the results over time, it doesn't seem like it's too far from possible, is incompetent and not as well trained as you would want your, if you're putting yourself back on the world stage, not as well trained as you want your fighting force to be. But the through line here is that if you are against imperialistic wars of people in the military trying to profit, or people who run the militaries trying to profit or just establish the size of their members, you need to be opposed to it when the Americans do it and when the Russians do it too. You can't just suddenly decide that it's totally cool. I read something about Nazis somewhere in Eastern Ukraine and that justify all of Southern Ukraine getting occupied, and lo and behold, it has a ton of coastline and it's strategically beneficial. That is exactly the DNA of imperialism, and you need to be against it when Vladimir Putin does it, even if you have a giant raging boner for him.
Perhaps especially then.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.